Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Today I will tell about summary in our group presentation. We are from group 4. The material is linguistic theory, universal grammar, and second language acquisition. Because this is the summary, so I will tell you the brief summary about our first material. First, the theory and its constructs. The linguistic competence of native speaker and first language acquirers. Generative linguistic theory aims to provide a characterization. The characterization of the linguistic competence of native speakers of a language and to explain how it is possible for child first language acquired to achieve that competence. So it is explained that a linguistic aspect from someone knowledge is very important for them to acquire a language itself. Without the linguistic skill or competence, it is difficult for someone to acquire the new language. In this framework, the language use, comprehension, and the production is assumed to be based upon an abstract linguistic system, a mental representation of grammar, syntax, phonology, morphology, and semantics. Human knowledge of language beyond the input of numerous ways. Language constructed by innate principles. Language is acquired presupposing such knowledge, with consequence that first language acquirers do not have to learn when certain kinds of sentences are ungrammatical, when there cannot to be certain kinds of structurally ambiguity. I think that's all. Now we will present by the next presenter. Thank you.
My name is Siti Hajar and I will talk about universal grammar or UG. So in universal grammar, the operation of linguistic rules specify universal distinctions of WH movement, and the idea being that all cases of WH movement will be subject to such constraints. So the claim is that language acquirers do not have to learn this principle because they are built into UG or universal grammar. And as Lightfoot on 1989 said that input data are said to trigger the appropriate parametric choice for a language being acquired. And the next is what counts as evidence. So first, the counts as evidence is the grammatically judgment task, which is a task of allows the researcher to investigate whether sentences that are disallowed for native speakers because of principle of UG are also prohibited in the interlanguage grammar. And the second is the truth value judgment. So in the truth value judgment methodology, the participants are represented with context in the term of a short story or a picture and have to judge whether a given sentence is true or false in that context. And the next is the common misunderstanding. So what is the common misunderstanding? First is the theory describes in this chapter or in what we have talked in this chapter doesn't seek to account for all aspects of L2 acquisition. And the second misconception is that if universal grammar constrains interlanguage grammars, and this necessarily predicts a successful outcome in SLA, such that the end-stage grammars of L2ers shouldn't differ in these significant respects from those of native speaker.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. In this chapter, I will explain about the explicit or implicit debate. A central assumption of the generative linguistic perspective on second language acquisition described in this chapter is that language learner acquire linguistic competence. There are some aspects of language that involve what is sometimes called encyclopedic knowledge. For example, interest in the mental lexicon and morphological paradigms. The the distinction between acquisition and learning, originally formulated by Krashen in 1981, becomes relevant. Schwartz has extended Krashen's proposal and arguing for a distinction between unconscious, like implicit linguistic competence, and learned linguistic knowledge. Uh, uh, Researchers working in the generative second language acquisition framework agree that the acquisition process is implicit and that the outcome of acquisition is implicit, but there is ongoing debate about the exact relationship between the acquisition of an unconscious system and more explicitly learned system, and the extent to which linguistic input can be manipulated in the classroom to affect language acquisition. And language involves cognitive processes that are domain specific or modular, in contrast to more general non-modular processes that apply to other aspects of cognition. Language acquisition takes place by means of mechanism within the language module. In other words, only implicit mechanisms specific to language are involved. And Schwartz makes the strong assumption that the outcome of explicit learning can never become the input to the implicit acquisition system or to implicit competence. In other words, there is no interface between implicit and explicit knowledge, or between explicit learning and implicit linguistic competence. In 1991, White, making the same assumption that the acquisition of implicit linguistic competence, has nevertheless argued that explicit input might contribute to the shaping of underlying competence, particularly in cases where the second language positive input does not provide evidence of ungrammaticality. That's all from me. Thank you.
Okay, I will explain about the functional approach to SEA. The functional itself means language is essentially a vehicle for expressing thought, with interhuman communication being just one of the uses to which can be put and not to be prioritized over other possible function. Jadi bahasa itu pada dasarnya itu adalah sebuah alat untuk mengekspresikan pemikiran kita dan sebagai interhuman communication. So, and language is a meaning of potential. It cannot be equated with the set of all grammatical sentence, whether that set is conceived as finite or infinite, like that. And there are two different modes of expression as ends of a continuum, pragmatic and or pre-syntactic mode and syntactic mode. And for example, it is loose conjunction, slow rate of delivery, word order governed by pragmatic principles such as noun and verb ratio law, and tight subordination, fast rate of delivery, word order governed by semantic principles, noun verb ratio hair. So that's all from me.
So I will explain about an exemplary study by White and James in 1998. White and James in 1998 addressed the question of whether the interlinguist grammar of adult L2 learners are constrained by principle of UG, in particular island constraint. The study examines the case of native speaker of Mandarin Chinese acquiring WH movement in L2 English. So the result from both tasks suggests that L2 learners observe island constraint in their L2 English. And next is explanation of observed finding in SLA. In seeking to characterize the unconscious underlying linguistic competence of L2 learners, the generative perspective on L2 acquisition cannot and does not aim to account for all of the observable phenomena discussed in the following. So, in observation first and observation 1, exposure to input is necessary for SLA. According to UG theory, there are certain aspects of grammar that are not learned through exposure to input, namely knowledge of universal constraint. And the observation 3, learners come to know more than what they have been exposed to in the input. This is the central observation that the theory aims to account for. So, but naturalistic input and classroom interaction and which cannot be explained in terms of the L1 grammar either.